Welcome to the Make Work Not Suck podcast.
We're big fans of Jocko Willink, and he's got the 5 signs you're a weak leader. So we're going to watch this video live. We're going to react to it. We're going to riff on it. We're going to see how this goes.
Have I trained him that when he makes a call, I'm going to second guess him? I don't know if I do that. But to give the cover my own ass response, I'm training people not to make decisions. Ultimately, how are you interacting with your team? What are you missing? So let's think about some of those 92 mistakes that you might have made. I got asked the other day, I was just kind of got done with a little fundamentals of leadership talk, maybe an hour I've been talking, and get to some Q&A, and I get asked, how do I give direct orders without seeming like a dictator? You see, if you have to give an order, if you have to bark an order at someone, you've already messed up. If you have to yell at someone, you've already messed up. If your first attempt, your first salvo is a direct order, then you're making 92 other mistakes as a leader.
All right, I'm stopping right there.
Ooh,
if you have to bark an order, you're basically a crappy leader.
I think I agree. I think you're using power and position and authority rather than buy-in and engagement to get what needs to be done. Now, maybe in a moment of crisis, of true crisis, there's not time to engage. There's not time to solicit input and feedback. Okay, we'll put that one aside. But that is the very, very rare occasion. The vast majority of the time, if that's where you're starting, you've missed a lot.
Yeah, I agree. I want to listen to a little more to see the context he's talking about. But he just made the statement, if you bark an order. Now, I get if you're jump yelling and screaming and you're having to get frustrated. I agree with that. But he basically said, if you have to give an order, you've made 92 mistakes before that. Let's see what he has to say here, because I'm already kind of, I half agree depending on where you take this. So let's see.
What are you missing? So let's think about some of those 92 mistakes that you might have made. So if you're a person that right now is thinking, yeah, but sometimes you got to just tell people what to do. I get it. I get what you're saying.
And there he is, right? But we paused it, and there he goes. All right, so let's see what he says.
But I'm telling you, you're messed up. Let me ask you some questions. Have you made sure that they know what the mission is? Because if they don't know what the mission is, guess what you got to do? You got to bark an order at them. That's what you got to do. That's what you got to do. They don't know what the mission is. They don't understand why they're doing what they're doing. And when something changes, you got to bark an order at them. That's what's going to happen.
Agree or disagree?
I mean, that's what I was talking about, is like, if you don't have the engagement, and engagement comes from not only understanding the mission, but understanding their role in the mission, right? If that's not clear, then yeah, you've got to interpret everything for them. And that's a game that you can never win. So yeah, I'm feeling super guilty about this, not so much from a professional standpoint, but from a personal standpoint of like my kids. Like, if the first thing you do is bark orders, I don't do that a lot at work, but I do that a lot at home. And so this is stinging pretty bad right now, because there's a lot of times I'm like, what are you doing? Put your shoes on. And it's like, okay, but did I explain to them that we are, where we're going, what we're doing, and why? Sometimes, but not as often as I bark.
All right. So we could definitely improve on this personally, because I'm in the same boat. The other day, I was just furious and barked a bunch of orders to the family because things weren't getting done. So, all right. So what's the mission? Got it. I think professionally, that's why we always start with vision. If you don't have the vision, then how do you know the journey to define the culture to get the results? So I think so far we are in agreement with Jocko. Let's see what he says next.
Have you let them come up with a plan?
No.
Because if I let Dave come up with a plan and something changes, Dave adjusts the plan. If I came up with a plan and now something changes, I got to bark an order at Dave. He doesn't know what to do because I came up with the plan. It's my plan. I have the deeper vision. So I'm the one that's going to have to bark an order. Let me ask you this. Have you trained your team to make decisions?
All right. So I'm tracking here. It sounds like he basically went straight from vision to journey.
Yep.
You have a vision. All right. You got a clear vision. Do you have a journey that allows them to be successful? I.e., did you train them?
Well, do you have a plan? And have you trained them how to come up with plans and execute plans?
Well, and how many managers Well, I think this goes into, like we talked about in the previous episode, the heroes, right? How many times does the hero come up with the plan and nobody else knows the plan, and therefore that's why the hero is always the hero?
Right.
Or the manager finds their value in being the one that comes up with the plan, and then their people don't know how to pivot on it, and they're like, well, I have to manage these people, and they need
Right.
me because I'm the only one that's capable of managing this team.
I see a lot of managers, not only they come up with the plan, but they're kind of the glue that holds all of the pieces together. They may even do a decent job of delegating, but it's like, okay, you do your thing, you hand me the ball, I hand it to the next person. Then they hand me the ball, I hand it to the next person. And so it actually can't work without them. They're required at every step of the process, even if they're not the ones doing the work. And I think that's a subtle way that people can think they're delegating when they're delegating tasks, but they're not delegating authority and responsibility.
Agree. All right, let's see where he goes next.
Because if I haven't trained Dave to make decisions and make things happen, he's not going to make decisions. He's not going to make things happen. And guess what I'm going to have to do? Bark an order. It's, going back, I did an FTX a while ago, and I was talking about the fact that when Seth and Leif, who were my two platoon commanders in Task Unit Bruiser, when they showed up in Task Unit Bruiser, they had actually been trained not to lead. And there's a bunch of ways that they do that in the SEAL teams. They train those junior officers not to lead.
Trained not to lead. I'm curious where he's going with this one. They were brought into the team trained not to lead. I'm going to make some assumptions, see if you agree with this. Like, is that actually a training tactic that the SEAL teams employed, or is that a training mistake that needed to be fixed?
I think it's an unintended consequence. That's my guess, is that it's an unintended consequence. We have trained them to follow orders, and they have done a very good job of following orders. And then they get to the point where it's their job to make the orders, and not everybody can make that jump.
So that sounds like when we elevate a very skilled team member as the team manager.
Right. Yeah. The best doer is not necessarily going to be a good manager.
All right. So let's see where he takes this one.
Hey, you don't know what you're doing. Hey, get in the back of the train. Hey, you're inexperienced. Hey, the chief handles this. They literally train them not to lead. And it's a bunch of ego that trains people not to lead. Unlike Tony Efrati, who is Leif's chief, who's like, hey, Leif, sir, you put this word out. It's better to have it coming from you. Oh, okay. His ego is just so strong. He doesn't care. But if you are not training your people to make decisions, guess what you're going to have to do? Bark orders. If you've trained people to make decisions, you don't have to say anything. You don't have to bark orders because they already look like Dave's looking back at me like, hey, I got this. I'm going to move over here now. Cool, great. Instead of me going, hey, Dave, move over there now.
All right. Did he take it where he thought he was? I'm a little.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's, if you have historically worked for a manager who barks orders and tells you what to do and hasn't cultivated in you the ability to assess the situation and make your own decisions, then you've been trained to not be a leader, because a leader's job is to assess the situation and make decisions. And there's a lot of organizations that don't really want their people to make meaningful decisions. They just want them to do what they're told.
I'm curious what he says next, because I'm still a little iffy on this one.
All right.
Why? Because I actually trained him not to lead. So if you're not training people to lead, you're going to have to lead them, which sometimes means I'm going to have to communicate to them in a dynamic way, in a very short, curt fashion, which means I'm barking orders at people.
All right. I got it. So how many leaders have you worked with where they think barking a vague order is leading, and it's like, well, I'm letting the team figure it out. And if they figure it out, then, that's leadership. I think it's a double-edged sword. I think there's a dichotomy, not to use his word, but I think there's a dichotomy to that level of leadership. But I think there's two sides of it. I think one is the person that just always barks the orders and just creates a culture where the team is just waiting to be told what to do. Mm-hmm. And I think there's the culture where the person barks such a vague expectation that they think they're allowing the team to lead by giving them a vagueness or vague direction that's not really clear. Maybe it's an idea, and then the team is just left to flounder to figure it out on their own.
Yeah, I think he's talking more about the former than the latter.
I know he is, but I'm throwing both of them out there.
Okay.
Because I think coming from the military, you're probably more tuned for the barking order side versus I think in the business world with people that don't have that level of experience, it's the vague ideas what's tossed out. And then you get individuals that, well, I'm the leader, so therefore it's my job to just push you to get a result on an idea I gave you with no context.
Yeah, I would say maybe to unpack something I don't think he said, but maybe he will here in a minute, is it's not just training you to make decisions, but also training you how to execute those decisions.
Right. That's it. Identify them, plan for them, and then execute them. Yeah, exactly.
Because somebody can identify, like, I need to go, build this thing, but I do not possess the skills to build that thing. So even if I've made the right decision, I don't possess the capability to do it. And then other times you've got the capability, but don't recognize that now's the time to use it. So there's two things there, and you've got to have both to be successful.
All right, let's see where he keeps going.
Now, can something happen that was so totally unexpected that now, and Dave at his level on the battlefield can't see what I say, and I say, Dave, you need to get back to building 34 now. Can that happen? Yes, that can happen. Should be rare. Have you made sure that your people know the end state? Do they know where they're going? Because if they don't know where they're going, you might need to bark at them and tell them which direction to move in because they don't know where they're going. They don't know where they're going. So you're going to have to tell them where to go. No, Dave, move to the right. Okay, well, I'll move to the right now. If he would have known that we were looking to end up over the right, he would have moved by himself without me saying anything. Have you ensured that your team feels confident that you will support them when they make decisions?
That's a good one.
Ooh, that one. That's a gut check.
Yeah.
Because
have you how did he say that? Have you instilled confidence in your team? How do you phrase that?
You will support them in the decisions that they make.
Ooh, there we go. I think it's the cultivating a culture of success comes through failure.
I think it's more nuanced than that, because I've worked for some great leaders who were just like micromanaged me for the first 30 days that I worked for them because they wanted to know if they could trust me. And then once I had gotten to the point where I earned their trust, they gave me a lot of latitude and they supported my decisions, but they made sure that they knew they could trust my decisions before they instilled confidence in me that they were going to back me up. I've seen leaders make this mistake where they're like, I trust my people. I'm like, you don't even know your people. You can't trust them because they're not qualified. They might not be qualified to make the decisions you're asking them to make. So you've got to know that before you just start promising you're going to back up whatever they decide.
I get that in the sense that you said it, where people will test you to get that level of trust. Mm-hmm. And I get that's like a kind of a trust building component to get to it. I think what he's saying there is, are you building a culture? Maybe it's building a culture of trust. Are you building a culture where people can know that you've got their back? Now, in some cases, I'm sure what he's talking about in these, SEAL decisions, like it's life or death. I think in the workplace environment, because the workplace is not as hostile as the front lines on a battlefront, are you cultivating a culture that allows teams to make mistakes, or not mistakes, make decisions, and you're going to back them up whether it's right or wrong, assuming they made the wrong mistake out of not a green line decision as opposed to a red. Right. If someone is just blatantly making a wrong choice because they're, being lazy or trying to steal from the company, like I'm taking all that off the table.
Right.
They genuinely tried to make the right choice. Are you going to enforce that? Are you going to endorse or back them up for making that decision, even if it was the wrong one? And if they don't have that confidence, then they're not going to make any decisions, right?
Right.
I think that's what he's saying.
They'll be paralyzed. Yep.
When they are default aggressive, does your team think you will back them up? Because if they don't think that, guess what? They're not making a call. They're not making a call. And guess who's going to have to make the call now? You are, and you're going to have to bark orders. Have you created a precedence that when someone on your team makes a call, you're going to give them the support that they need. Because if that's the presence, if every time Dave makes a call, I say, got it, Dave, here's the support you need. Guess what? I'm training him like one of Pavlov's dogs to go out and make decisions because he knows I'm going to give him the support that he needs.
I think that's a good call out. Are you training your people? How do you phrase that? Are you training your people to know that they're going to get the support they need? Any thoughts on that one?
I wonder if there is a private versus public distinction to be made here, right? Like in a one-on-one, I would want to ask, hey, why was this the decision that you made? How'd you get to this? Help me understand why we're going this way. But publicly, because I would want to understand his thinking, and maybe there's a coaching opportunity to be like, I don't think you're seeing this right. I would tweak your decision here, right? Maybe we can't go back and fix it, but as a coaching moment, I think there's value to that. However, publicly, I want him in front of his people to know that I back him up. And so I might think about this a little bit more nuanced and say, yes, I absolutely want to give the true and accurate perception that I support him, while at the same time having an opportunity to do a retrospective on that decision and say, was this actually our best decision, or could we learn and get better through this?
Yeah, I think that goes, yeah, exactly. Is there public recognition behind the choice, or allowing the choice, or supporting the choice?
I mean, I've been on the receiving end of this where I was told that I owned this decision. And so I made a call and the team started moving forward. And then my boss came in and cut my legs out from underneath him. No, we're not doing that. That's stupid. We're going to do it this way. And the team, for the rest, like for months after that, knew that whatever I said didn't matter. Because if my boss could come in and change everything, then they stopped listening to me. And they would only do it if my boss said yes. And I'm like, okay, so what's the point of me being here if I'm not allowed to make decisions?
I think in the past 3 weeks, I've been on the giving side of that equation and on the receiving side of that equation. So now I'm like, oh shit.
I was not talking about you. I was talking
I know you were, but as you were saying that, I was like, you know what? I was on the receiving end of that. I had this whole thing. I had this project to execute, and I pushed it all forward, and everybody was on the same page. And then the CEO comes in and says, no, this. And I'm like,
right.
Oh shit. Okay.
Right.
But then I also was the one at another company. I was the CEO doing that. So, awesome. All right. Mirror reflection time. All right, here we go.
Or have I trained him that when he makes a call, I'm going to second guess him?
Yep. Guilty. Guilty as charged.
Because if Dave is expecting to get second guessed, he's not even making a call. Then guess what I got to do? I got to bark orders, which is terrible. Be careful of little half suggestions without any explanation.
That is what I was talking about earlier. The half suggestions without explanation. I'm making the assumption that's what he's about to say, where it was like you give the idea with no context, and then you have to go back through. Okay, so let's see if that's what I was talking about earlier. Let's see if that's what he's about to hit now.
Like Dave says something like, hey, Jocko, I think we should go over to the West. And my response is, I don't know if I'd do that. You ever had that kind of leadership?
That's not where I thought he was going with it, but oh, damn, have I been in that situation?
Yeah, I think I've pulled that one too a couple of times.
Oh, crap. All right. I think I'm getting a lesson from Jocko while we're doing this reaction video. All right, here we go.
100%. I'm covering my own ass by halfway negating your call, but I'm still letting you go do it. These are the kind of leaders that you won't get decisive subordinates. You will end up having to bark orders all the time. Because Dave only needs to hear that one time before he shrugs his shoulders and looks at me and says, what do you want me to do, boss? Because he doesn't want to hear, I don't know if I'd do that. Horrible. If there's something I don't think Dave should do, I'll be like, hey, Dave, have you thought about this? And Dave says, ooh, I did think about that, and here's my response.
Ooh, that's a good one. So, okay, so he didn't go the direction I was thinking he was going, but in the sense of the vague roundabout way versus, hey, did you think about, or are you missing? And then allowing Dave to, yeah, I thought about this because of this, or I thought about that because of that. I think there's a right way and a wrong way to handle that one. Because I've seen too many times where leaders, they approach it like that, but they do it in a fearful manner. And what they do is they don't just express the fear, they go straight into the action items. Well, but you need to da 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 da, as opposed to going, hey, did you think through these 5 things?
Yeah.
I think sometimes don't be afraid or fearful that your team didn't think through it, and so you're trying to get to the end result. I think just ask the direct question: Did you think of this?
How's that decision going to impact this? How are you going to handle this thing that's likely coming for you? I think those more pointed questions can help you gain confidence in his plan or help him adjust his plan, but it's still his plan.
Right. Whereas too often I see where people think through the list and then they react, they make assumptions on it, then they act on those assumptions, and then what's publicly known is the action based on the assumptions as opposed to just asking the question.
Right.
So the key thing there is if you make assumptions, clarify the assumptions. Don't act on your assumptions that your team was not capable of making a decision. Otherwise, as he says, you'll be barking orders.
And here's what we're going to do if that happens. Oh, okay, great. You got it covered. Or he says, oh, no, I hadn't think about that. That actually makes it seem like a bad idea. Let me think about it more. But to give the cover my own ass response, I'm training people not to make decisions.
That's another interesting one. The cover my ass. As a manager, I'm giving the cover my ass response.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're just being a crappy manager.
Yeah.
You're thinking about your own CYA as opposed to the efficiency, execution, and well-being of the team.
So ultimately, how are you interacting with your team? Because if you interact correctly all the time, then every time you interact with your team, you're actually training them to be able to step up and be able to lead.
You know, I just realized this as he was saying it. I think too often we think too much about training as being this like, you know, here's the SOP and we want you to memorize this and do all these things. Whereas he's literally talking about the interactions are the training. How often are we putting on an SOP one thing and we're executing or training on something totally different?
I think in most organizations, they are almost counterproductive, right? We're going to go to this workshop and we're going to learn how to, communicate better as a team. But then we never practice it. And in fact, what we practice is exactly the opposite of what we learned in the workshop last week, but we're just going to go back to keep doing what we've been doing. And so that kind of implementation of how do we actually do what we have learned is, I think, a big gap in a lot of organizations.
You know what he just fundamentally said from my vantage point? You know, the whole phrase, culture trumps strategy, or what? No, it's culture
eats strategy for breakfast. Peter Drucker.
Right. That phrase basically is the essence of what he's talking about is you're training your people this. He's talking about the habits and behaviors. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't matter what the SOP says. If the culture / habits and behaviors contradict it, what I find infuriating is a company goes, well, we need to modify the processes. The processes just haven't been set clear enough. Let's just modify the SOP. We just need this training. If we just do this training, then everybody will be on the same page. And it's like, no, there's no amount of training. There's no amount of SOP that's going to make up for the fact that the culture is not on the same page. And it doesn't matter how much you update. I mean, there's one company, I joke because they said, I was like, oh, you have 37 point SOP. He said, no, it's 37 pages. Mm-hmm. Why is it 37 pages? Because of all of the gotchas and the lack of decision-making and empowerment that they had over the years.
And CYAs
that turned a simple process into a 37-page SOP. That's huge.
Yeah.
you're training your people every single day based on how you behave.
Every time you let someone make a call, it helps them learn how to make calls. So every time you let someone make a call, every time Dave says, hey, Jocko, I think we should hit the target from the north, and I go, sounds good, I trained him like Pavlov's dog to make things happen, to make decisions. Every time I make the call, every time I say, hey, Dave, we're hitting the target from the north, get in line, I just trained him not to make a call. He's learning. He's in the habit now of waiting. He's in the habit of not making calls, which leads to me barking orders.
So I think it's important to distinguish the context here, right? Because what he's talking about here, if I'm remembering it correctly, he's talking about a new leader, like a manager who's got a team underneath him, and he's this, the superior officer, right? And he is trying to teach a leader how to lead. Okay, that is very different from a manager teaching an employee how to do their job for the first time, right?
Oh yeah.
And I think this is an important distinction. When you get a new hire who is fresh out of college and they show up for their first day of work, you don't ask them to make the decisions, right? You tell them, here's what we're doing, here's how we're doing it, here's how we're going to know when it's done, here's why we're doing it. But it is very descriptive of this is exactly what you're going to do. As you move up and you start dealing with leaders, it gets different.
Well, let me challenge you on that thought, because I think to a degree, you may be telling them what to do, but you're ultimately pointing them to an SOP or a training guide that they have to make the decisions to act upon. And so I think that's still giving them what's the mission. Because at the end of the day, I think you can be confused between defining the mission and barking orders. Barking orders is, okay, what do I do now? Okay, now you're going to sweep, and here's how you sweep. Okay, now what do I do now? Now you're going to do this, and you're going to do that over there. Versus, all right, what is the mission? The mission is to get you trained. Here is the SOP for all these things that we need to do. Here's the plan. I'm going to check in with you. That's not barking orders. That's the mission brief in his terms. I think that is allowing them to make decisions as that new hire that allows them to make the right decisions and follow, read the SOP and start making traction and getting guidance. I think in a new hire where you literally are just barking orders and you don't set the mission and the plan, I think you're literally setting it up for failure from day one. So I get contextually how there's a difference between like a new manager or a new person coming in or a manager, a leader, or new role, etc. But I think behaviorally it's identical.
I totally agree. You have to start with the mission. We have to start with why we're here and how your role fits into that. But if you don't know how to sweep a floor, I'm going to have to show you exactly how to sweep a floor. And this is not the time to ask, how do you think we should sweep the floor?
I agree and disagree.
Okay.
I think to some degree, I know we're using like sweeping the floor as a very basic now. I'll use my son, for example. He started a job 6 months ago. He's 17 years old, and he works at a restaurant.
Okay.
And he started out as a busboy, and he had to clean, and they kind of expected him to know how to do some basic things, but they're still, because of a restaurant, like his cleaning style had to up a little bit, or he had to learn these little nuances because he was around food versus, his bedroom. But at the end of the day, it still was actually, I would say his experience was a good example of barking orders where he didn't really learn, and we had to do the learning at home.
Right.
And it was because they didn't set the mission of what the goal was. They basically said, okay, well, here's a bin and there's dishes.
Yeah, go.
What I do is set dishes, and then he'd put the dishes. Right. Oh, well, you need to do this now.
Right.
They were barking orders along the stages as opposed to giving him a flyover.
And the interesting thing about this is this idea of informal training, which we talk about. We just got done talking about them at the muster, which is, hey man, I can sit down with you for 7 minutes and do a role play on some leadership situation or some contingency scenario. And that 7 minutes of training is totally legitimate. But on top of, you got formal training, which is, hey, Dave, we're going to go to a 2-week class on how to make decisions. Then we got 7 minutes of me saying, hey, let's talk through this scenario and what decision would you make? And that's also training. Then life is training. Just living life is training. And life and work are all just training opportunities. So every time we need to do a proposal for a client, it's an opportunity for Dave to do that proposal. Every time. Every time there's a question from a client, there's an opportunity for Dave to take and lead on that answer. Every time we do a mission, it's an opportunity for Dave to come up with a mission plan. These are real world things.
I think the key takeaway here is every interaction is a training opportunity.
Yes.
Every like I said, every proposal, every question from a customer, every one of those is a training opportunity. And I'm reflecting back now when in some companies, a customer comes into the customer and the first thing the person does is, oh, what do I do with it? They don't know what to do.
Right. It goes straight to their manager.
I'm going to think of it this way. I'm going to think now, what's your training program? I don't mean what's your LMS and SOPs. I want to know what your day-to-day in the trenches, on the battlefield training program is.
Yeah, I've seen very few, but really well run organizations that do this. And just about every leader has an apprentice. They've got somebody that they are consciously, actively preparing for the next level. And I have seen them use that kind of lieutenant, that apprentice, whatever word we want to use, to take a first pass at things, right? So something comes down from the CEO, hey, I need your 3-year strategic plan. They would turn to their person and say, hey, I've got a 3-year strategic plan due to the CEO next week. Could you take a first pass at it? And the person's like, oh my gosh, they're not going to put that in front of the CEO, but it gives them a chance to start thinking about what would I do if I was in that situation? Because maybe in a couple of years, I'm going to have that guy's job and that request is going to come to me. And so I'm going to get it started. And then I'm going to sit down with my boss, the person who actually received the request, and talk through it. I like this. That's a good idea. We missed this. Go back, do it again. And so they get their apprentice to end up doing some of their work for them because it is a training program to help the apprentice learn how to think like their superior.
That also goes down to the part you might have glazed over, is then you have a culture of having an apprentice, which means it's training for the job before you have the job.
Right.
And that's a culture of doing that. How many people are trial by fire? And they expect,
unfortunately,
them to be perfect.
Right. Or we expect this to work like professional sports, where I get paid millions of dollars before we ever know if I can actually do the job. It's like, nope, it doesn't work that way. You gotta prove to me that you can do the job before you're going to get the paycheck.
Yep.
These are what happens every day. And by the way, this happens with your kids every day.
Nailed it.
Ouch. No.
It only took 9 minutes and 26 seconds to call you out for what you found out in the first 60 seconds, but there you go.
This happens with your employees every day. This happens with your team every day. Everything that's going on around you is an opportunity for you to train. So if you're in the habit of bossing people around, or of giving direct orders, or of telling people what it is they need to do, take a step back, detach, and start training your people to lead instead of training them not to lead.
Yeah, I think the thing they said that resonated and hit the most is you're also training yourself. You're training yourself not to trust them. You're training yourself not to apply decentralized command and all the things that sit underneath that, the relationships, the communication, all of those things. Every time you're barking an order, you're training yourself. That's a pretty powerful thing.
All right. I didn't catch that until he just recapped it. But that is so true. You're training yourself to not trust your people every time you bark an order.
You're also, I would say, in training yourself, you're setting expectations for yourself, right? Like, I have to do, right? And then my to-do list starts rattling in my head of all the things that I have to do. But a lot of those are not necessarily things I have to do. They're just the things that I have been doing because I've been training myself to do them. How many of the things on your to-do list should be on somebody else's to-do list, but you haven't trained yourself and them to own it? I think that contributes to a lot of burnout for leaders.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's all of these decisions that have to be made. And I'm like, yes, every one of those decisions needs to be made. Very few of them need to be made by you.
Well, it goes back to, I think, when you're barking an order, you're training yourself to not trust your team, which is a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
So it goes back to you. And it doesn't matter if you are the manager, or you are the leader, or the CEO, or the founder, or even the peer that everybody else looks to. Because there's a lot of people forget this too, is there's like that one person on the team that's a peer with everybody else, but they're not really the manager. They're kind of the de facto team lead that everybody looks to, that also barks the orders.
Yep.
Yeah, you're not building an effective team.
Nope. Yeah, this is good. It stings, but I think he's right that if you're barking orders, giving a lot of directives, do this, go here, do that, do this, it's either a true crisis, which is rare, or you've not done the hard work to train, motivate, engage, cast the vision, and equip them to make decisions on their own. The longer you do those bad behaviors, the things you shouldn't do, the more decisions bubble up to you, the more you have to bark orders because you're tired, you're frustrated, you're decision fatigue. And so it kind of becomes this spiral that you've got to find a way to get out of, because the more you bark, the less they do. The more you bark, the less they do. Where do you get out?
Yeah. I mean, at some point, it's got to be the reset, which I think is funny, going back to our previous episode about, clearing all the reoccurring calendars and the disconnecting and the having fun. All of those things are reactive to this, having to reset all your reoccurring meetings at the end of the year. Mm-hmm. I guarantee you half those reoccurring meetings are because you have to bark orders.
Yeah,
so
probably.
If you go back to the previous episode and then take this advice right here, how many of your reoccurring meetings are because you have to bark orders? And if you could train your team or put trust in your team and get the decision-making within the team, are those meetings even relevant anymore? So if we go back to it, his video was the 5 signs you're a weak leader. And it was barking orders means you've already failed. Number 1. Number 2, failing to train decision makers. Mm-hmm. That was not having the trust, etc. Number 3 was the half suggestion trap. Number 4 was the importance of decentralized command. And the fifth one, sorry, not the fast one, the fifth one was leadership is constant training. And I think our over-the-top component of it there is training is not the SOP. Training is not the content in the LMS. Training is the culture that's being executed every single day, followed by you're also, when you're exhibiting these, you're also training yourself. If you bark orders, you are negatively training yourself and your team, versus if you flip that around, if you aren't barking the orders and the team is being effective, it means you're training them the right way. So are you a weak leader?
In some ways, yes. But I'm working on it.
Here's the question for everybody. Do you see these signs in your own leadership style or your manager? How can you work to address them? And what are your next steps? Because if you can address this, you can address the training, you can address the order barking, you can, in fact, make work not suck for you and your team. Final remarks.
No, man. Stings. Gonna have to go recover from this, do a little reflection and journaling, and see if I can't be a little bit of a better leader next week.
Make Work Not Suck, our podcast that talks about exactly that. Our process, vision, journey, culture, and results. We present real-world business solutions that make the difference. Our goal is to make work not suck. Hosted by Ryan Hodges, co-host Daniel Steer. Join us each episode and make work not suck.